Hey everybody, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I am Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
You are very welcome to our channel. We are two doctors of social scientists who love having conversations about all kinds of culture all around the world, lived or pop varieties, you name it, pretty much anything we will talk about. We are empathy educators who focus explicitly on building inclusive communities through having conversations about difficult and interesting topics. From everything to what we learned about Papua New Guinea to systemic racism and why we're all a little bit racist, or, body shape diversity in Bridgerton. Just plucked those out of the hat of our quite extensive YouTube channel. We love having conversations. We do it all the time. We turn on the camera for you. So please make sure wherever you are listening to or watching this to engage with us, like, subscribe, comment. We want to hear from you guys, especially about these topics.
We need to talk about Handmaid's Tale.
I don't know. That was like dramatic enough that I was like, especially about the
And I was like, we need to talk about childhood trauma, the deification of a mediocre white woman with anger issues and misplaced self-concept. We need to talk about a lot. This is a Handmaid's Tale joint.
Yeah.
And we're going to be discussing episode 2 of season 4 called Nightshade. And this video is part of that series, this audio, however you're listening to us or watching us or encountering us. We've been talking about Handmaid's Tale for a hot minute, and we're going to continue to talk about Handmaid's Tale for as long as they make this thing that they keep making now. Our feelings about the show have evolved as the show has evolved. However, regardless of enjoyability level, it remains one of the most fascinating pieces of art that covers our particular intersections that we want to talk about.
Yep.
If you're new to The Handmaid's Tale or you are new to our coverage of The Handmaid's Tale, couple things real quick. We are not a June Osborne stan account.
No, absolutely not.
We have some real issues with June. We are super sympathetic to Luke. We think that Moira, Emily, and Rita might be the heroes of the show. And we have deep concerns about the treatment of women of color as performers and characters on the show. We have deep concerns with Bruce Miller's, the showrunners, apparent unwillingness to engage with criticism.
Mm-hmm.
All that to be said, today we're talking about Nightshade, which is a great example of all the things we think are wrong with this show. In a neat little package. And that could be different if they made just a couple different decisions. So we're going to talk about the Waterfords, then we're going to talk about Emily and Moira, and then we're going to talk about June, and we're going to run through it that way. So the Waterfords are still in prison. Hot Joel from Parenthood is still involved in this. Serena is under the entirely misguided impression that she has any level of power over Fred anymore. And at the end of this all, we find out that Serena is pregnant.
Which, she can't. The whole reason we have Gilead was because she couldn't get pregnant, right?
And timing, I don't understand. And who, it has to be Fred's, but when did they
I don't know what the timeline was, but I was talking about this with my mom when they were escaping to Canada and they were staying overnight at a safe house or something. It appeared as though they slept together. They didn't show us the actual sex act.
Completely forgot that. So
yeah, I remembered that for some reason. And then because obviously it's Fred's, sleeping with anybody else. Because if they didn't show at all Hot American having sex with Serena, that is a missed opportunity for us to just see Hot American without his clothes on. I know his name is Mark Twello, but I prefer Hot American. But yeah, but I don't know how long time has passed. How far along is she? We have no idea.
There's an interesting conversation to have here about the nature and definition of abuse and all of that. And we'll get back to that in a minute after we're done with the kind of blow by blow recap. So then we head up to Canada. The bulk of this episode, actually the most interesting things in my opinion, happen in Canada and are to do with these 86 children, 89 children? 86 children, the year my brother was born, that arrived on Air Canada. And the apparent complete lack of social workers in the country of Canada in order to help facilitate their transition.
Childcare workers?
Into Canada. I love any moment we get with Emily and Moira. I'll just be honest. I love every moment we get with Rita. To me, as I said at the beginning, they are the heartbeat of the show. They are the ones that are trying to actually reformat something post Gilead. Because no matter where you are on the planet, the presence of Gilead has changed how the world works.
Yeah.
The global economy is different. The global culture is different. There is no one on the planet, because of what America, we assume, was in that world, just the way it is now. There's no one that is not touched somehow by what would have been a massive coup to overthrow the American government.
Yeah, and like drop nuclear weapons over half of what was the United States. Like we'll have to get the map in here. Hulu did release a map of Gilead in the lead up to this season, and you can see kind of where the colonies are, where the bombs were dropped, what's Gilead, what's America, what's, I don't know, independent California. I don't even remember.
Yeah, I think we went back to the Republic of Texas, which I'm here for.
Yeah, somebody mentioned Texas. Alma mentioned Texas in the second or third episode as a place like, well, that's where I'm going to go. So yeah, like anything that reformats that much of a plot of land and in global power has some ripple effects.
So it boggles my mind a little bit that how while I appreciate deeply the show addressing childhood trauma and addressing that this would be a very difficult process for the children, I want to get into my rant about how no one actually, besides the three women I mentioned, are actually thinking about the children.
It was like reactive rather than proactive.
Which again, boggles the mind. So now let us return to June.
Do we have to?
We do.
I'm kidding.
Against my will.
Love talking about June. It makes me so happy in the morning.
So June has an opportunity to get her and the handmaids they have to leave for reasons. There's guardians sniffing around the farm.
The guardians come because they killed that one guardian.
They killed the one guardian in a very Aunt Lydia energy.
Yeah, full shout out to Hillary Kelly at Vulture for her recaps and for pointing out what we missed in episode 1, which was the parallels between June and Aunt Lydia, which become also more apparent as this series progresses, as this season progresses. But yeah, in a very Aunt Lydia moment, then they have guardians on their tail. I wonder why.
They
just disappeared a guardian.
But heaven forbid June ever think of a consequence of her actions. So guardians are sniffing, they've got to peace out. And then June goes to Jezebel's, of their local Jezebel's.
The country, I called it Country Club Jezebel's.
Country Club Jezebel, yeah. And debaucherous house party with enslaved sex workers.
As you do.
As one does. I will tell you, there's a scene in this montage that just had me going, shots.
Yeah, everyone was
doing that. And she talks to a sex worker who knows who she is, named Daisy.
Yeah.
And essentially talks Daisy into helping June facilitate the murder of a whole bunch of commanders through poisoning.
And that's the thing, like, June went to them to, like, this person was, like, Daisy's in Mayday or has contacts in Mayday to, like, move the handmaids. That's why she went to her. And then she saw those military commanders and she was like, oh, hey, you know what I should stop doing? Planning our escape. You know what I should start doing? Planning murder.
And Alma, one of the only voices of reason, calls her out on this, but we'll get back to that in a minute. So it goes exactly how anyone who has ever thought about consequences of actions go, which is that June is captured again at the end of the episode by eyebrows. I was looking for a better description about how she feels about him, but I actually don't know how she feels about him at this point.
Father of her child that she seems to have forgotten as soon as
father of her child that appears to be irrelevant in her movements or decision-making processes. So that's the end of the episode. So let's do some thematic stuff. I know what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Just besides my general hatred of June. Dr. Erin, take it away. What should we talk about first?
Yeah. So super excited to see Rita show up in her adorableness, and to learn that like Luke has become this fundraiser for the kids. I'm so here for Luke in these first 3 episodes, y'all. And I didn't think that's where I was going to end up as the show progressed, but as we talked about, we're not big fans of June at the Mo. But I find really frustrating this continued focus on heroicizing June at the expense of all the other humans in Mayday, women in Mayday, let's call a spade a spade. There are a couple guardians, sympathetic guardians, but we all know it's the Marthas running the show. They had this underground railroad network that was getting children out one at a time and getting people out one at a time for God knows how long, probably as long as Gilead was in operation. And every time I see someone give June full credit for what happened, and you can come at me with June was the one that made it a big thing. June got all the children. Like, yes, June was part of it. Yes, June's influence helped, but like, I just don't like not recognizing the work of all these other humans. And so for Rita to stand up there and say it's all because of June, I keep flashing back to the one Martha in Mayday that just said, you've jumped on a moving train, on a train that was already moving, and all of a sudden you're chasing Guevara.
Yep.
And I'm like, that train is still moving. Mayday is still in operation in Gilead, trying to help all these women who are enslaved in various different ways. So I love Rita. Not super happy about that. Also, her claim that Gilead brought out the best in June made me want to throw something at my television. So that's one of the things I think I'm going to keep harping back on this season, is that like June can't do this by herself. She hasn't done this by herself, but the show's insistent need to keep her alive and keep her the central protagonist and also hero is at the expense of a lot of other bodies.
It was interesting because this question came up to Bruce Miller at the Television Critics Association, evidently this summer, because there was a lot of us, we were not alone. Vulture thought this, I think an AV Club thing that I read, people I talked to, were all kind of hoping that this would give like humans with no official capacity to care about this show. Felt that this was a really great episode of like the end of season 3 was a great chance to let June die and to actually tell the Handmaid's Tale story. And you could have made it really a lot more like the show. It's not Grey's Anatomy. It's not about Grey's. It's not June, the Handmaid's Tale story, it's not Offred's tale.
Right.
It's the Handmaid's Tale.
And there's a lot of handmaids.
There's so many handmaids. I would love Alma's story. Like all of these would be fine. Alma's tale would be.
I'm there for it.
And evidently Bruce was very dismissive of that idea. No, this show's called The Handmaid's Tale. It's her story. And I was like, okay, your marriage of those two ideas is where I am going to break with you, Mr. Showrunner.
Yeah, and
you're incorrect.
Yeah, and like you made such a great point. We'll link also in the show notes to another Vulture piece that just dropped recently called The Continued Cost of June's Survival, which written by Whitney Friedlander, which we read yesterday and agree with literally every single word. But she pointed out the thing that you pointed out as well at the end of season 3, that the quote that June says in her internal monologue as she's being carried away
is Moses.
And Moses didn't make it to the promised land.
No, Moses dies.
And so
Moses dies. He leads them in circles in the desert for 40 years and then he dies.
Yeah, you were really adamant, I remember at the end of season 3, that we were like, this is the place where June should just die and someone else should take over. No,
Bruce Miller's really into June.
Yeah.
And this is a great, like, to me, this is one of the things, like, I follow a lot of criticism circles and I love, reading stuff about this. But there's always this tension between the deification of the showrunner versus a writer's room.
Yeah.
And that has really come because of Vince Gilligan and Matthew Weiner and some of the guys who ran the stuff that won all the awards forever. And to me, this is a show that needs a writer's room and needs a showrunner more like Shonda Rhimes, who is a collaborator, versus a showrunner. And this, if you're going to tell this big of a story, you need a lot more voices at the table than he's allowed. And it's just, there is a writer's room. There's always a writer's room, but the credit that is given is consistently a small group of people.
Because we're losing out on a lot.
We're losing out. And it's so clear to me that he is June. He just makes decisions and then doesn't think through the consequences. And then they have to mop it up 2 or 3 episodes later.
Yeah. And because of this, it feels like a, one of those weights that on a chain gang or something. I forget what the word is for them, but the big metal ball is wrapped around the show, and that ball is June. And we are losing out on so many other stories at the expense of that weight, that we always have to direct the story somehow back to her being the savior or the hero or the revolutionary or whatever.
It's not the story that Margaret Atwood set out to tell.
No.
And it doesn't, if this is going to go, it's been interesting. People have been bringing this up too. I have not read The Testaments, which is the published sequel to Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
But this doesn't square with that. And so people are very curious now how Atwood was very, very, very involved in season 1 and supposedly gave the blessings for the direction that season 2 was going in. I haven't heard about any of her involvement past that. So if one of y'all knows, please let me know. But there are just so many more interesting stories to tell because really what excuse me, what Gilead has done is turn June into a monster.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way it turned Aunt Lydia in the same way June was always somebody who didn't think through consequences. We learned that in her flashbacks. Yeah. And so in the same way that because I can always tie this back to Marvel, don't you guys worry. In the same way that the super soldier serum reveals what is already in the person. It doesn't make someone anything. It reveals what they are. Gilead just reveals what is already in a person.
Yeah. And I think everyone in Gilead is in trauma, especially every woman. Especially every woman. And so June is a person who has been traumatized for years. And I'm there for this discussion that she is not the person she was at the beginning. I'm there for this arc that she somehow doesn't care about her children anymore and is now on this revenge kick. But then they do things in episodes that then they're oh no wait, she does care only about Hannah, or they always have to pull back to that, and it's very
jarring,
disparate. It's disconnected. I almost want to say schizophrenic, but it's just back and forth. And this idea that she is a reactionary and not a planner is, and this is the same thing that is said very well in the Vulture recap, or in the Vulture op-ed by Whitney Friedlander, that a lot of people die because of June's choices, and we don't spend any time with that. And we'll get into that more when we talk about episode 3, but it was kind of leading me to the conversation that we get, the honest conversation between Emily and Moira, which we talked about in episode 1. We're getting some hints that the show knows that June's off the rails a little bit. And I think this conversation between Emily and Moira was a big hint to that. And Moira says Emily says, I guess June didn't think that through, in referencing just sending 86 kids to Gilead. 1, no, of course June didn't think that through. 2, you don't have any child psychologists in Canada?
Yeah, like y'all didn't think it through either. Like
y'all didn't think it through either. You just found out after the fact that this young boy was not going to be happy with the aunt he had never met.
And every time they're like, it's their real family, it's their real family, I just want to scream, like, has anyone thought about what the kids feel, experience, believe, want? Like, yeah, get him out of Gilead for sure. I'm not saying leave him in Gilead because that's his, but you took him from his parents.
The only parents he has ever known, because he has no memory of his birth parents.
And P.S., that dad is his birth father.
Yeah.
Like, you took him, and like these people, like, or it isn't, or whatever. I can't remember the exact circumstances of this particular kid.
Not sure that we learned, but
family is not just a biological thing, especially not for small children. And it made me so angry that like they're mad at him for not eating pizza. He's never had pizza in his damn life. Like,
no. That, like, and so also, you don't have any experts in childhood trauma. You don't have any social workers, whatever. They didn't prepare that woman either. They didn't prepare his aunt either. And like, yes, they need to place the children. 100% they need to place the children. And I understand there's like an immediate need to place them somewhere to care for them.
But like this new nonprofit just started when the kids got off the plane.
What about all the other kids that the Marthas were getting out one at a time? What about people that escaped from Gilead and made it to Canada on their own over the last 5 years? Like, you have to tell me the Canadian government has something in place, because we know what happened to Luke and Moira and Emily. They had programs in place to deal with refugees. And
also, like, current Canadian government employs social workers. So I'm assuming pre-Gilead Canadian government did the same thing.
Y'all, it was just so messy and unnecessarily so.
Well, I do appreciate that they brought that up to us in a certain way as viewers. Like, it's hard for these kids. What I would much rather them see is like, what I would have much rather seen is an honest conversation with that aunt and Moira just saying, it's hard. I'm trying really hard to hold these things together. I know he only wants natural stuff that I don't know those recipes. Can you get me those recipes?
Yeah,
like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And then you still get Rita, which is great and needed and perfect. But I wanted that shaped differently to demonstrate that the kids' mental health was not an afterthought the way the show presented it as in this episode.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more on that. There's a different way to have this conversation. But we do get the honesty from Moira and Emily, which I love. And the big quote, I think, of the season so far, where Moira says, that's what June does, takes the big swing and fuck the consequences. The story of the biography of June Osborne should be the after colon of that. We get an interesting seedling that Emily asks Moira, why do you always feel like you have to clean up June's messes? And Moira, explaining that she feels guilty because she got out and June didn't. Well, June's made choices several times to get out and has chosen not to. She could have gone with Nicole and Emily. So I'd also like to see some therapy for our Moira. I hope they continue to pick up these ideas that they've dropped. I don't know that they will in this show, because they very often don't, but I'd love to explore the guilt more of like people who have escaped, and Moira specifically as a human, because I find her fascinating, and Emily. But I was glad to hear that people see June as a human being with flaws and not just this like shining beacon of light that the rest of Canada appears to think she is because of the Angel's flight.
The final point I want to bring up is the scene that the lawyer and Serena have about if Fred abused her. Yeah. So there's a lot of layers to this. Can Fred abuse her if it's the system that she built? Can Fred abuse her if she thinks he abused her right back? If she thinks she abused him right back, sorry. This is part of the mess of setting up a fundamentalist system. This is part of the mess of the consequences of the mess that Serena created when she thought she could control everything.
Mm-hmm.
So is how Fred treated her abuse? Yes. Is she an architect of the system that let him do that? Yes. Should he still be prosecuted for cutting off her finger? Yes. Should she be prosecuted for setting up the system? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that she said yes and no, it's complicated, and it's not. This is also very, very similar to people who have been in abusive relationships that have all, like Serena is not in this category, but there are people who have been brainwashed subtly by the abuse for so long to believe that it is their fault or to believe that they wanted it. And the process of claiming that something was an abusive act is usually the longest part of someone's healing process. Is very challenging to look back and call that abuse.
Yeah.
Gilead is an abusive nation state set up on fundamentalist cult principles that pervert Protestant Christianity into a control mechanism and strip it of its theology.
Yeah.
And anyone who was a part of that should go to jail. Even my beloved Commander Lawrence.
He wrote the playbook.
He wrote the playbook. Yeah. Setting up Gilead isn't actually hard. Honestly, any of us could do it if we wanted to. It is an abusive nation state.
Yeah.
People are abused within it. And I like what Dr. Aaron said earlier, where everybody in Gilead is in trauma. We want to be clear that like even the commanders are, mm-hmm. even the people that set this up are. I think that, Putnam is, even though he deserves every ounce of it. Just kidding. But trauma is not something that you don't experience because you have power.
Yeah.
Or you don't experience because you made choices that led directly to the trauma. Trauma is something every human experiences. And I appreciated that they wrestled with it for a moment. And then they did the thing that like narratively, maybe you can argue that because they talked about her pregnancy so much, she was always going to get pregnant and that's the Chekhov's gun. But I just feel like this was, we don't know what else to do with Serena and Fred. So we'll see which end it ends up on. I was very intrigued as to what was going to happen with Serena and Fred when they got arrested. I am increasingly less intrigued the more I watch how Canada is machinating with them.
Yeah, because I think there was so much interesting stuff happening already.
Yeah.
And there's so much to explore.
Yep.
With who they were, what they did.
Yep.
And what Canada is going to do with them. What, as we all presume, is going to happen as we march towards the destruction of Gilead. I think a lot of us are pretty sure that's where the show's going to end.
If it doesn't, can we talk about a bigger shark jump?
Oh, there isn't one.
There isn't. I hate Game of Thrones, and this would still be worse.
Oh, it would be way worse. It would be so much worse than Game of Thrones, and we were like.
Yeah, if anyone ever we could do if we set up a Patreon, our feelings about season 8 of Game of Thrones could be a bonus episode.
So angry. So angry. Yeah. For me, there's just so many other things I'd rather them talk about, and it just feels like adding something to the mix that didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
At all. The other thing I want to briefly mention is that we get hints of growing resistance in Gilead in this episode from Daisy, the sex worker at the country club Jezebel's, who says that the news of June's actions, Mayday's actions, are spreading and people are starting to, cut power lines and do these other. I would love to see that. It's a person who specializes in forms of resistance. I would like to see that kind of fire spreading through Gilead and see people finding ways and mechanisms for resistance. We get one very specifically with Esther's poisoning of her husband so that he stays mentally incapable of raping her once a month, which fair dues, Esther. Sounds like something Dr. Kristen and I would do if we were wives, but I don't think we would be. We'd probably be in one of the colonies or dead.
They would have just killed us. Yeah.
Unless we had viable wombs, and then Handmaid's like, you can never kill a handmaid. But yeah, so even that as a mechanism of resistance within the abusive state of Gilead is interesting to me. But it's all down to the same thing we started this episode with, is they're not going to give us more of that stuff. They will sacrifice all that interesting, juicy tidbits for the love of June as their archetype hero, heroine. And boy, will we have some more thoughts on that when we get to episode 3 next week. But I wanted to make sure and note the resistance because I think it's interesting, and hopefully they'll come back to it.
Fingers crossed, and we live in hope. Listen, if you liked this video and our discussion, first of all, we would love it if you hit that thumbs up button. If you're watching this on YouTube, it really does help. If you're listening to us on a podcast, make sure to rate and review that podcast because then other folks can find us. Wherever you are, we would love to hear your thoughts and comments. The quickest way is to comment directly below on our YouTube video, but we're really easy to get a hold of across all the socials. I don't believe in boundaries, unfortunately. I'm trying real hard, but they're still resisting. Anyway, we're everywhere except TikTok, but including Clubhouse. So make sure to find us where you are. If you liked this conversation, good news, wherever you are listening to us, there's more like it. Subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on the podcast, wherever you are. We talk about The Handmaid's Tale a lot, but we also talk about everything that we said at the beginning in any way, shape, or form that we can explore human nature and the way that we are so currently siloed away from each other in a fractional existence. And we know we can make a more cohesive one. And so everything we do is in service to that idea, including ranting about Handmaid's Tale. We swear to God, it fits. We will see you next time for a rant and exploration of episode 3. And we hope wherever you are listening to this, you have not been poisoned by nightshade.
Take care, everybody.